Hi everyone, Professor Gustin here, and we are in the week that we're talking about prokaryotes. And we've already talked a little bit about cells in general. We talked a little bit about eukaryotes versus prokaryotes. And so when you think of the prokaryotes, think of bacteria. And I put a picture here that you'll also see in lab, but these are eukaryotic cells. These are cheek cells. I've got two cheek cells here. You can see the nucleus and the nucleus in each one of those. And on the surface, you see little bacterial cells. And this is something that you can easily see also in the lab if you were to make this slide yourself. So we've got some eukaryotic cells here and lots of prokaryotic cells. The other thing I just want to mention is the chapter I think is titled The Prokaryotes, Bacteria, and Archaea. And I think we mentioned in the introductory lecture that archaea are kind of the weird bacteria. They are structurally and metabolically a little bit different than bacteria and a little bit different than eukaryotic cells. I'm not going to be spending much time this semester talking about them because a lot of our focus on bacteria is just understanding kind of the common bacteria around us and how they're involved in disease. And it turns out none of the archaea actually cause disease, as far as we know. So I'm going to be, when I say prokaryotes, I'm going to be talking about bacteria. So we're in section 3.1, and the first learning outcome says describe the three major shapes of bacteria. So when you look under your when you look at bacteria under your microscope, which you could do easily if you were in a live lab, you'll notice that that a lot of bacteria look really similar because they're generally three major shapes. It doesn't mean there's not some bacteria that fall outside of this, but the vast majority of bacteria are three major shapes. They're either round, you can see some round cells right there, and that's called coccus. They can be rod-shaped, which is elongated, and that's called bacillus. And then they can be any version of a spiral. And you can see here that some of them are kind of look like bacillus, but they've got a little curve to them. Some of them are definitely noodly shaped, and some of them are really tightly coiled. But I'm just going to group all those kinds of shapes, whether they're curved or obviously spiral or coiled. We're going to call those spirals. So most bacteria come in three common shapes: coccus, bacillus, and spiral. Those shapes can also be arranged in different ways. So a lot of times you're going to see them as singles. So I wouldn't call that arrangement. I would just say that they're singles. But a lot of bacteria, and depending on the kind they are, will make certain arrangements. They'll associate themselves with other cells, and that can be kind of a hint as to what they are. So there's certain bacteria that they happen to be cocci, and they form pairs. And so we call those diplococci. So di means two, or diplo means two. Diplo means two, coccus means round. So there's an example of diplococci. And some bacteria just naturally form diplococci. We've got a lot of them in our mouths. Some bacteria form tetrads, and tetrads refer to four round cells. I guess you could have called them tetracocci, but somebody decided to call them tetrads. And again, in the live lab, when we're doing, I give everybody an unknown bacterium, and there's one kind that always forms tetrads. And some people don't notice it right away, but as soon as I look at it in the microscope, I'm like, oh, I know what kind of bacteria that is, because it's a certain kind that's on our skin all the time, and it always forms tetrads, four round cells. These two terms people get mixed up: streptococcus and staphylococcus. Streptococcus means a chain. Strepto means chain. Coccus means round. Streptococcus means a chain of round bacteria. Now, you've all heard of that because you know about the disease called strep throat. And if you look at the bacterium, it's actually called Streptococcus pyogenes. You look at that under the microscope, you're going to see a lot of round cells in chains. So it's an easy way to say, you might have strep throat. So think of strep as strips or chains. Staphylococcus are round cells in clusters. So again, coccus tells you they're round. Staph means clustering. So I think of like if you're at a staff meeting, you're all clustered together. So Staphylococcus aureus is the bacterium you might have if you have a staph infection. So the shape and the arrangement of the bacteria can also be used as part of its name. You can see down here there's also a streptobacillus, so that means strips of bacillus-shaped bacteria. But and that means, so it means chains of rods. But sometimes streptobacillus will go back and look like when they're growing fast, they'll be in chains, and they're growing slower, they'll be in singles. But so that morphology can kind of change. But these streptococcus and staphylococcus and tetrads and diplococcus, they're really stable. They'll stay like that whether they're growing fast or slow. So here's a couple examples. See if you can figure them out. So look at that slide and see if you can figure out what's the shape. I say shape and arrangement. So the shape, you have 3 possible shapes. So I would say that's a bacillus. And they're just mostly singles. Some of these are in pairs, but they're in pairs probably because they're dividing, they're growing quickly. So I see a lot of singles. So I would just say that's bacillus. This one, I can look at individual cells and I see that they're round. So those are a coccus. And they're in clusters. See if you see how, like especially here where it's spread out, notice the cells are sticking to each other. And so they're clusters, so I would say that's Staphylococcus. Here's a couple more examples. Here's some other cells. These are long cells, but they're in chains. So I say we're looking at, let's see, elongated cell and chains. I would say they're called Streptobacillus. Here's a little curvy one. They look a lot like bacillus, but they have a distinct curve in them that these don't. So I would say there's some kind of spiral. And spirals don't generally form arrangements. This one's a little tricky. I'm going to look right here, and I can see these are definitely in chains, and I have lots of round cells. Round cells and chains. Remember what they're called? Streptococcus. But right here, this is kind of throwing me, because when I look at those, they almost look like chains of bacillus. What you have to remember is when bacteria are dividing, you have one cell, and that one cell kind of enlarges before it divides into 2. So I think what you're seeing here are these cells enlarging right before they divide into 2. So they kind of look like bacillus. But I look over here and here and here, and I consistently see round cells. And I think, I'm going to think that's, even though they look a little bit bacillus-like, it's because they're dividing quickly. So these would definitely be Streptococcus. So that's section 3.1.